The homeless boy's hands were shaking as he pressed down on the little girl's chest. Her father, wearing a leather vest with a Hell's Angels patch, was running toward him with anger in his eyes. Eli had only seconds to bring her back before everything went wrong. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change his life forever. And what happened 72 hours later, nobody in that neighborhood expected. Before we continue, please subscribe and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. The afternoon sun hung low over Maple Street, making long golden shadows across the cracked sidewalk where dandelions pushed through concrete like small acts of bravery. It was the kind of light that made everything look softer and kinder, like the whole world had been dipped in honey. The air was warm but not heavy, carrying the smell of freshly cut grass and the promise of summer evenings that go on forever. In this light, even ordinary things seemed touched by magic. The faded blue mailboxes, the chain-link fences, the small brick houses with their neat little yards, everything glowed. And there, moving through this golden hour like she was part of the light itself, was a little girl on a pink bicycle. Her name was Emma Shaw. She was 7 years old, with dark curls that bounced against her shoulders and a gap-toothed smile that could melt the hardest heart. The bicycle was her pride and joy, metallic pink with white handlebar streamers that caught the breeze, a small bell that she rang at every corner, and a basket on the front that held a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppers. She'd gotten the bike for her birthday 3 months ago. And since then, she'd ridden it every single day. Rain or shine, hot or cold, Emma and that pink bicycle couldn't be separated. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every place where the concrete buckled from tree roots, every house where a dog might bark, every corner where she needed to slow down. This was her route, her territory, the small kingdom she ruled from her bicycle seat. She'd pedaled this same path so many times she could probably do it with her eyes closed, though her father always told her that was a terrible idea and please never try it. Emma pedaled with the confidence of a child who'd never known real danger. Her legs pumped in steady rhythm. Her hands gripped the handlebars with easy certainty, and her face held that special look of pure happiness that only children can have, being completely in the moment, not thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, just enjoying the movement and sunshine and being exactly where she wanted to be. What Emma couldn't know, was that she had exactly 43 seconds before her world went dark. 43 seconds of normal life, of innocence, of believing that today was just like every other day, that she'd ride home, park her bike in the garage, and run inside to tell her dad about her day at school. 43 seconds before everything changed. But those 43 seconds were still hers, still perfect, still untouched by what was coming. She rang her bell as she passed Mrs. Chin's house, even though Mrs. Chin wasn't outside. It was tradition. Then she waved at the Morrison's tabby cat sitting in the window, another tradition, and the cat flicked its tail in what Emma chose to think was a wave back. These small habits mattered to her. They were the threads that stitched her world together, made it feel safe and known and wonderfully, beautifully predictable. From the alley between 5th and 6th Street, someone else was watching. His name was Eli, though most people in this neighborhood didn't know that because most people in this neighborhood didn't see him at all. 10 years old, he'd mastered the art of being invisible. Not the magical kind, but the kind that comes from need, from survival, from learning that sometimes being unseen is safer than being noticed. He stood in the shadows between a dumpster and a chain-link fence, his small body almost swallowed by clothes that were 3 sizes too big. The jeans were held up with a rope belt. The jacket was stained and torn at one elbow. The sneakers had holes in both toes and didn't match. One was blue, one was gray. Because when you're taking shoes from a donation bin behind the community center at 3 o'clock in the morning, you don't get to find a matching pair. That Eli's face was smudged with dirt. His hair was an uneven mess because he'd tried to cut it himself with a pair of scissors he'd found. And his eyes held something that no 10-year-old's eyes should hold, a tired understanding of how hard the world could be. He'd been living on these streets for 6 months. Before that, there had been foster homes, 3 of them in 2 years, each one proving that not all houses are homes, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you most need protection from. So he'd run. Just walked out one day and decided that sleeping in abandoned buildings and eating from soup kitchens was better than pretending to be grateful for a roof that came with bruises and criticism and the constant reminder that he was a burden nobody really wanted. The streets had their own dangers, but at least they were honest about it. Eli had claimed this alley as one of his spots. It was relatively safe, well lit enough that no one bothered him at night, hidden enough that most people walked past without looking in. He'd wedged a flattened cardboard box behind the dumpster where he could sleep if the condemned building 3 blocks over got too cold or too crowded with other homeless folks. He'd stashed a backpack with his few belongings, some granola bars he'd saved from the shelter, a library book he'd borrowed and would probably never be able to return, and a photograph of his mother that was creased and faded from being handled too much. His mother. That's where this all started, really, where the invisible boy story began. She'd been everything to him. Sarah Martinez, 28 years old, working 2 jobs, raising a son on her own, and doing it all with a smile that made Eli believe everything would be okay. She sang while she cooked. She helped him with homework even when she was exhausted. She called him her little miracle and meant it with her whole heart. And then one day when Eli was 8 years old, she'd collapsed in their apartment. Just fell. One moment she was standing at the stove making eggs, and the next moment she was on the floor, unconscious, and 8-year-old Eli had no idea what to do. He'd called 911, his small fingers shaking so hard he could barely press the buttons. And he'd waited beside her, holding her hand, telling her to wake up, wake up, please. The paramedics said she'd had a cardiac event, an undiagnosed heart condition. Nothing anyone could have predicted, nothing anyone could have prevented. She died at the hospital 3 days later, and Eli's world ended with her. That was 2 years ago. Sometimes it felt like 2 lifetimes. Now, standing in his alley, Eli watched the world pass by like he was separated from it by thick glass. He watched people come and go, families walking together, kids laughing, parents holding hands, and he felt the familiar ache of being outside of life. Looking in, he'd been watching this little girl on her pink bicycle for weeks now. She rode past his alley almost every day around the same time, always with that same joyful expression, always so confident and safe and loved. He wondered what that felt like, to be loved, to be safe, to have somewhere to go. He'd never spoken to her, never even thought about it. You don't approach when you're invisible. You don't insert yourself into the bright, normal world of people who belong. You just watch. You just remember what it used to feel like back when you belonged, too. The little girl pedaled closer, her streamers dancing in the breeze, and Eli found himself smiling just a little. There was something about her joy that was contagious, that reached even into his shadows and reminded him that good things still existed in the world, even if they weren't for him. She rang her bell. The clear, cheerful sound echoed down the street. And then something changed. Eli saw it before she did. The way her hands suddenly went to her chest. The way her pedaling stopped for just a moment. Just a tiny hesitation, barely noticeable. But Eli noticed. He'd spent 2 years watching people, learning to read the small signs that most folks missed. He saw the confusion cross her face, saw her try to shake it off, to keep pedaling. The bicycle wobbled. Emma's other hand left the handlebar. Both palms now pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold something in or keep something out. Her face went pale, all that sun-kissed color draining away in seconds. The bike swerved left, then right, and her feet slipped off the pedals. Eli took a step forward, some instinct telling him something was very, very wrong. The little girl's eyes went unfocused. Her body went slack. And then, as if someone had simply turned her off, she fell. Not a dramatic fall, not a movie tumble with flailing arms and screams. Just gone, consciousness cut like a snapped wire. Her small body tilted sideways and crumpled to the pavement with the awful, heavy sound of dead weight hitting concrete. The bicycle crashed beside her, wheels still spinning, streamers tangled, Mr. Hoppers thrown from the basket onto the sidewalk.
For a moment, everything stopped. The world held its breath. Eli stood frozen at the edge of his alley, his mind refusing to process what his eyes had just seen. The sunny afternoon suddenly felt wrong, like the light was lying, like the warmth was a trick. Because warm, safe afternoons aren't supposed to contain moments like this. Children on pink bicycles aren't supposed to just fall and not get up. But she wasn't getting up. She lay on the sidewalk, one arm bent underneath her at an angle that looked painful. Her dark curls spread across the concrete, her eyes closed, her chest not moving. Not moving. That's what broke through Eli's shock. The realization that her chest wasn't rising and falling, that she wasn't breathing, that this wasn't a simple fall or a scraped knee or something that a band-aid and a hug could fix. This was the moment, the one he'd been too young to recognize 2 years ago, the one he'd been helpless during, the one that had taken his mother while he sat beside her, holding her hand, doing nothing because he didn't know what else to do. But he wasn't that helpless 8-year-old anymore. Eli's feet moved before his brain fully caught up. He ran from the alley, his mismatched shoes slapping against the pavement, his oversized jacket flapping behind him. He ran the way you run, when seconds matter, when hesitation means death, when every moment of delay is unforgivable. He reached her in 5 seconds, dropped to his knees beside her in 6. Up close, she looked even smaller, even more fragile. Her skin had taken on a grayish color, and there was already a scrape forming on her cheek from where she'd hit the ground. Eli's hands hovered over her, shaking, his mind racing through fragments of memory, pieces of information he'd collected 6 months ago at a shelter on the other side of town. It had been a Tuesday night. Eli had been sleeping in an abandoned warehouse, but it was January, and the cold was the kind that could kill you, so he'd swallowed his pride and gone to the 5th Street shelter for a hot meal and a place to sleep. They'd been running a community training program that evening, CPR, and basic first aid, taught by a volunteer named Ms. Chun, who worked as a nurse at County General. Most of the adults in the shelter hadn't paid much attention. They'd been there for the food and warmth, not the education. But Eli had watched every single demonstration, had listened to every word, had asked questions after everyone else had shuffled off to their cots. "Why do you want to know all this, sweetie?" Ms. Chun had asked him, her voice kind but curious. "Just in case," Eli had said. "I want to be ready, just in case." He'd been thinking about his mother, about that awful moment when he'd stood helpless, about the promise he'd made to himself in the 2 years since, that he'd never be unprepared again, that if someone collapsed in front of him, he'd know what to do. He'd never expected it to be a little girl on a pink bicycle. Eli checked her breathing the way Ms. Chun had taught him, leaned close, watched her chest, felt for air against his cheek. Nothing. She wasn't breathing. His heart hammered against his ribs. His hands shook worse. But somewhere underneath the fear, there was something else. A strange, cold clarity. A sense of purpose that cut through the panic like a blade. He couldn't save his mother, but maybe he could save this girl. Eli tilted her head back gently the way he'd been shown, checked her airway, pinched her nose, gave 2 rescue breaths, watching her chest rise slightly with each one. Then he positioned his hands over her sternum, one palm over the other, fingers interlaced. He'd practiced this on the training dummy 6 months ago, pressing down until Ms. Chun said he had the depth right. He thought then that he'd never actually use this, that it was just information, just preparation, just a way to feel less helpless in a world that had proven itself to be overwhelmingly cruel. Now kneeling on a sun-warmed sidewalk beside a 7-year-old girl who wasn't breathing, Eli understood that preparation and desperation were 2 sides of the same coin. He pressed down, 30 compressions. Ms. Chun had said hard and fast, "Don't be afraid to push. You're trying to manually pump blood to the brain. Broken ribs heal. Brain death doesn't." Eli counted in his head, his thin arms working, his whole body putting weight into each compression. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Her small chest compressed under his hands. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. He couldn't think about how fragile she looked. 14, 15, 16. Couldn't think about whether he was doing this right. 17, 18, 19. Could only count. 20, 21, 22. Could only push. 23, 24, 25. Could only hope. 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. 2 breaths. 30 more compressions. His world narrowed to this, to the rhythm, to the count, to the desperate attempt to force life back into a small body that had given up.
The street was still quiet. Nobody else had noticed yet. The crash of the bicycle hadn't been loud enough to draw attention, and Eli was just a homeless kid kneeling on a sidewalk, the kind of thing people's eyes skip over, even when they look directly at it. But across the street, in the driveway of a small brick house, someone had noticed. Marcus Shaw was unloading groceries from the back of his pickup truck, moving with the easy routine of a man who'd done this 100 times. He was a big man, 6 feet 2 inches, broad-shouldered, with tattooed arms and a salt and pepper beard that he kept neatly trimmed. He wore jeans, boots, and a leather vest that showed his membership with a simple patch across the back. Hell's Angels, Vice President, Maple Street Chapter. Marcus had been with the club for 12 years, had earned his patch through loyalty and brotherhood and the kind of bonds that were forged in fire and sealed in blood. The Hell's Angels weren't what the movies made them out to be, not entirely. Sure, there was history there. Sure, there were rules and codes and things that happened in the shadows that didn't need to see daylight. But the club was also family. The club was protection. The club was belonging to something bigger than yourself, being part of a brotherhood that would ride through hell for you if you needed it. Marcus had needed it once, years ago, and the club had shown up. So he'd given his life to it, proudly wore the patch, rode with his brothers every Sunday, showed up when they called. But before he was Hell's Angels vice president, before he was Brother Marcus, before any of that, he was Emma's father, single dad. His ex-wife had left when Emma was 2, decided that motherhood and small-town life weren't the adventure she'd signed up for. She'd moved to California, sent birthday cards sometimes, called on Christmas if she remembered it had hurt like hell at the time. But Marcus had learned to see it as a blessing because it meant Emma was his to raise, his to protect, his to love with a fierceness that sometimes scared him with its intensity. Emma was his whole world. Everything else, the club, the brotherhood, the reputation, all of it was secondary to that little girl with the gap-toothed smile and the pink bicycle. He'd just set down a bag of groceries when he turned around to grab another one and caught movement in his peripheral vision. Saw Emma's bicycle. Saw it wobble. Saw her fall. His heart stopped. For a fraction of a second, Marcus's brain tried to make it okay. Kids fall off bikes all the time. She's fine. She's getting up, but she wasn't getting up. And there was someone kneeling over her. Some kid. Some dirty kid in oversized clothes putting his hands on Emma. Marcus didn't think, didn't process, didn't analyze. 12 years in the Hell's Angels, 20 years of bar fights and street brawls and situations where violence was the language everyone spoke. All of that muscle memory kicked in instantly. Someone was over his daughter. Someone had put hands on his little girl. Marcus sprinted across the street with the kind of speed that shouldn't be possible for his size. His boots pounded pavement. His vision tunneled until all he could see was Emma's body on the ground and the stranger hunched over her. He was yelling before he even fully knew what he was saying. Get away from her. Get your hands off my daughter. The words came out like thunder, like rage, like every protective instinct a father possesses concentrated into a single roar. Eli heard it, heard the fury, heard the pounding footsteps, heard death coming for him wrapped in leather and fury. But he didn't stop, couldn't stop, because he was on compression 19 of his second cycle, and if he stopped now, this girl would die. So his hands kept pushing, kept counting, kept fighting for her life. Even as a giant of a man charged toward him with murder in his eyes. 21, 22, 23. Marcus was 10 feet away. His face was a mask of terror and rage. His hands were reaching out to grab this kid, to throw him aside, to protect his daughter from whatever this was. 26, 27, 28.5 feet away. Close enough that Eli could see the tattoos on Marcus's arms, could see the Hell's Angels patch, could see the absolute conviction in this man's eyes that Eli was a threat that needed to be eliminated. 29, 30. Marcus's hand closed on Eli's collar, fingers gripping the worn fabric, ready to yank him away. And Emma gasped. It wasn't a dramatic gasp, not a movie gasp with flailing and coughing and immediate full consciousness. Just a small, wet intake of breath. Her chest rose on its own, fell, rose again. Marcus froze. His hand still gripped Eli's collar, but his eyes were locked on his daughter, on the rise and fall of her chest, on the color slowly creeping back into her face, on the small movement of her fingers. Eli had stopped compressions the moment she gasped, his hands still hovering over her chest, ready to start again if needed. He was breathing hard, his arms shaking from effort, his face pale, but his eyes held something beyond fear. They held desperate hope. "She's breathing," Eli whispered. "She's breathing." Emma's eyes fluttered open. Confused, disoriented, she looked up at the sky, then at the faces above her. Her father's terrified expression, the strange boy's exhausted relief. "Daddy?" Her voice was small and hoarse. "What happened?" Marcus dropped to his knees so fast it should have hurt. His hand released Eli's collar, forgotten, as both arms reached for Emma instead. He gathered her up carefully, checking her over with shaking hands, looking for injuries, for explanations, for understanding. "Baby, you fell. You stopped breathing." His voice cracked on the words. This man, who'd faced down rival gangs without flinching, who'd been in situations where showing fear meant showing weakness, was openly crying. Tears cut tracks through the dust on his face as he held his daughter. "I don't remember," Emma said, still confused. "I was riding my bike, and then, I don't know. Everything went dark." Marcus pulled her closer, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her small body like he could physically hold her to this world through sheer force of will. He was shaking. This giant, tattooed biker was shaking like a leaf. "You're okay," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "You're okay. You're okay." Over Emma's shoulder, Marcus's eyes found Eli. The boy had backed up a few feet, ready to run, looking like a wild animal that expected to be hit. And Marcus realized, really realized, what had just happened. This kid, this dirty, homeless kid that Marcus had been about to throw across the street, had been doing CPR. He'd been saving Emma's life. Marcus had charged at him, screaming threats. And the kid had just kept going, kept doing compressions, kept fighting for a stranger's life even with danger bearing down on him. Kept going when he could have run. Kept going when any sane person would have protected themselves first. Kept going because a little girl needed saving and nothing else mattered. The silence that followed was profound. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. The spinning wheels of Emma's bicycle finally came to rest. The afternoon sun continued its golden pour across the scene. Indifferent to the miracle that had just unfolded, Marcus stared at Eli. Eli stared back, still poised to flee, still not quite believing he wasn't about to get hurt. "You." Marcus's voice came out rough. "You saved her." Eli didn't respond, didn't know how to respond. His whole body was still flooded with adrenaline. His mind still caught in the loop of compressions and breaths, and "Please live. Please live. Please live. You saved my daughter's life." Marcus said it again. Like he needed to speak it aloud to make it real. That Eli's eyes darted to Emma, who was now sitting up in her father's arms, looking confused but alive, breathing, present. The grayish color was gone from her skin. Her eyes were clear. She was okay. She was okay. The weight of that hit Eli all at once, and his legs gave out. He sat down hard on the sidewalk, his breathing coming in shaky gasps, his hands trembling in his lap. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. The thing he'd been too young and too scared to do for his mother, he'd done it for this little girl. He'd saved her. If you've ever felt invisible, truly invisible, like you're a ghost moving through a world that doesn't see you or acknowledge your existence, then you know what Eli felt in that moment. You know the weight of being overlooked, of having people's eyes slide past you like you're not even there, of wondering if you even matter at all to anyone. But in that moment, on that sidewalk, with a little girl breathing and a giant of a man staring at him with tears running down his face, Eli wasn't invisible. He was seen. He was real. He mattered. And sometimes that's what heroes look like, not people in capes or uniforms or shining armor. Sometimes heroes are 10-year-old boys in secondhand shoes that don't fit, living in alleys, eating from soup kitchens, carrying everything they own in a torn backpack. Sometimes heroes are the ones everyone else has decided aren't worth looking at. Sometimes courage comes from the places we least expect. Sometimes the people we ignore are the ones most ready to save us. The morning after Emma came home from the hospital, Marcus Shaw woke up with a single purpose burning in his chest. Find the boy. Find Eli. The doctors had confirmed what Marcus already knew in his bones. Without that CPR, without those crucial minutes of someone fighting for her life, Emma would have died on that sidewalk. Brain damage at minimum. More likely, she simply wouldn't have made it. A 10-year-old homeless kid had saved his daughter's life and then vanished like smoke. Marcus couldn't let that stand. Wouldn't let it stand. He started where all searches begin. At the beginning, the spot where it happened. He stood on that sidewalk in the morning light, Emma's pink bicycle now safely in their garage, and looked at the alley where Eli had emerged from. Empty now, just a gap between buildings, a dumpster, some scattered trash. Nothing that suggested a child lived there, but someone had to know something. Marcus walked into Chin's corner store first, the little family-owned shop that had been on this block for 30 years. Mrs. Chin looked up from behind the counter, and her expression shifted when she saw the Hell's Angels patch on his vest. Not fear, exactly, but caution. The careful neutrality of someone who'd learned that survival meant not getting involved. Morning, Marcus said, working to keep his voice gentle. I'm looking for information about a kid, 10 years old, thin, wearing oversized clothes. Might come around here sometimes. Mrs. Chin's face gave nothing away. Many kids come in here. This one's homeless, living on the streets. He saved my daughter's life yesterday, and I need to find him. Need to thank him. Something flickered in Mrs. Chin's eyes. Recognition. Maybe sympathy, but she shook her head. I mind my business. You should too. It went like that all morning. The bodega owner, who suddenly didn't speak English well enough to understand the question. The postal worker, who'd seen nothing, knew nothing, remembered nothing. The regular sitting outside the laundromat, who got very interested in his phone the moment Marcus approached. Nobody wanted to talk to the Hell's Angel about the homeless kid. And Marcus understood why. In neighborhoods like this, you survive by staying invisible, by not drawing attention, by never volunteering information to anyone who looked like they might have authority or power. The patch on his back might mean brotherhood to him. But to them, it meant trouble, questions, complications they couldn't afford. What Marcus didn't know yet was that Eli was watching him from a parking garage 3 blocks away. Terrified that the man had come back angry. Terrified that yesterday's miracle was about to become today's nightmare. 2 days of searching had taught Marcus Shaw patience he didn't know he possessed. 2 days of dead ends and closed doors, and people who looked right through him when he asked about a homeless boy named Eli. 2 days of Emma asking when she could thank the boy who saved her. And Marcus having no answer to give. On the 3rd day, Marcus tried the public library. It was a long shot, but Ms. Rodriguez at the community center had mentioned, off the record, voice low like she was sharing classified information, that sometimes the street kids went there. Warm in winter, cool in summer, free bathrooms. Nobody bothered you if you looked like you were reading. Marcus pushed through the heavy doors into the hushed sanctuary of books and fluorescent lighting. The librarian at the front desk glanced at his vest, his boots, his general appearance, and her hand moved subtly toward the phone. He was used to that reaction. Just looking for someone, Marcus said quietly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. A kid. I'm not here to cause trouble. He found Eli in the back corner, tucked into a chair that was too big for him, a book open in his lap. The boy looked smaller somehow than he had on that sidewalk, more fragile, like he was trying to fold himself into invisibility, to take up as little space as possible in a world that had made it clear there wasn't room for him. Eli's head snapped up the moment Marcus rounded the bookshelf. His eyes went wide. His body tensed, every muscle coiled to run. Marcus stopped moving, held perfectly still, the way you might freeze when encountering a deer on a trail, knowing that any sudden movement would send it bounding away into the trees. Hey, Marcus said, barely above a whisper. Then he did something Eli clearly didn't expect. He sat down, not in the chair next to Eli. That would be too close, too threatening, but on the floor, back against the bookshelf opposite, creating distance and lowering himself so he wasn't looming over the boy. Marcus didn't speak again, didn't ask questions, didn't make demands. He simply reached into the bag he'd been carrying and pulled out a sandwich, turkey and cheese from the deli, chips, an apple, a bottle of water. He placed them on the floor between himself and Eli. An offering, no strings attached. Then Marcus pulled out a book he'd grabbed randomly from a shelf on his way over and opened it, pretended to read, gave Eli space to decide what happened next. The silence stretched. 1 minute. 5 minutes. 10. Eli's eyes kept darting between Marcus, the food, and the nearest exit, calculating, weighing risk against hunger, trust against survival instinct. 15 minutes. 20. Marcus turned a page he hadn't actually read. Waited 30 minutes. Eli whispered, "Is your daughter okay?" Marcus looked up, met those weary eyes. "She's perfect. Because of you." The next morning, Eli returned to his spot near the alley. It was routine now, the small rituals that structured his days. Morning at the library when it opened. Afternoon, near the alley where he could watch the world pass by. Evening at the shelter if they had space. Or the condemned building 3 blocks over if they didn't. Survival was about patterns, about knowing where to be and when. About making yourself small enough that trouble passed you by. He was sitting on the cracked curb. The backpack Marcus had returned to him yesterday resting against his legs. When he heard it first, it was just a distant rumble, thunder. Maybe a truck passing on the highway, something he could ignore. But then it got louder, closer, not thunder at all, but something mechanical and purposeful and moving in his direction with absolute certainty. 1 motorcycle. Then another. Then more. The sound built like a wave rolling down the quiet residential street where nothing louder than a lawn mower usually disturbed the peace. 3 motorcycles became 5. 5 became 10. The rumble became a roar that shook windows and set off car alarms and pulled people from their houses to see what disaster was headed their way. 10 became 15. 15 became 20. 20 became 23. Neighbors emerged onto porches. Mrs. Chin stepped out of her store, hands shading her eyes. Parents grabbed their children, pulled them close. Everyone knew that patch. Everyone knew what Hell's Angels meant. Trouble, violence. The kind of danger you didn't ask questions about. You just got out of the way and hoped it passed you by. The convoy rolled down Maple Street like thunder given form, chrome gleaming in the morning sun. Leather and metal and the raw power of 23 motorcycles moving in perfect formation, and they stopped. In front of Eli, every single one. Engines cutting off in sequence until the roar faded to silence. And 23 men sat astride their bikes, facing a 10-year-old boy who'd frozen with his back against a chain-link fence and nowhere to run. Marcus stepped off his bike first. He walked toward Eli slowly, deliberately, and the boy's eyes were wide with confusion and fear and complete inability to understand what was happening. "We've been looking for you, brother," Marcus said. Brother. Not kid, not boy, not even his name. Brother. Eli's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind Marcus, 23 grown men. Leather vests decorated with patches earned through loyalty and blood. Tattoos covering arms that had seen fights and scars and hard years. Faces weathered by lives lived on the edge, stood in formation. And they'd come for a homeless 10-year-old who owned nothing but a torn backpack and oversized clothes. Marcus reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. He knelt down, bringing himself to Eli's eye level, and held it out. "Open it," Marcus said gently. Eli's hands shook as he unwrapped the package. Inside was leather, soft and supple and clearly new. A vest, child-sized, custom-made. No patches yet, but the leather itself was protection, belonging, family. "Every Hell's Angel earns their patches," Marcus said quietly. "This one, you earned the day you saved Emma. But it took 6 months for the club to make it official. You're one of us now, Eli. Really one of us." Eli traced the letters with his finger, his eyes burning with tears he didn't try to hide anymore. He'd learned it was okay to cry when you were happy, that emotions weren't weakness, that being vulnerable with people who loved you was actually the bravest thing you could do. Remember that alley where Eli used to hide, the one between 5th and 6th Street where he'd wedged cardboard behind a dumpster and called it home? The Hells Angels had transformed it, cleaned it out, brought in soil and lumber, built raised garden beds, and planted vegetables that anyone in the neighborhood could harvest. They'd put up a little sign, "Community Garden. Take what you need. Give what you can." It wasn't charity. It was a statement, a reminder that invisible people existed, that they mattered, that somebody cared enough to create a space where they could be seen and fed and treated with dignity. That on a Saturday morning, Eli stood in front of a room at the Fifth Street shelter, looking out at 15 faces that wore the same expression he used to wear, weary hope mixed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving when the world wants you to disappear on a mess. Chun stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, tears already forming in her eyes because she understood the poetry of this moment. The boy who'd learned CPR in this very room 6 months ago, who'd paid attention like his life depended on it, had asked questions, had wanted to be ready, was now teaching others. "My name is Eli," he began, his voice stronger than it had any right to be. "6 months ago, I was living on the streets. I learned CPR here because I wanted to be ready, just in case. I never thought I'd actually use it. But then a little girl fell off her bike and stopped breathing, and everything I learned here, everything Ms. Chun taught me, it saved her life." He paused, looking at each person in the room. "You never know when you'll be someone's miracle. But you can be ready. You can be brave. You can show up. That's what I'm here to teach you today." For the next hour, Eli demonstrated chest compressions on the training dummy, explained rescue breaths, walked them through the steps with patience and clarity, answered questions, encouraged the people who were afraid they'd do it wrong. "Doing something is always better than doing nothing," he told them. "Even if you're scared, even if you're not sure, trying to save someone is always the right choice." Marcus stood in the back of the room, Emma holding his hand, watching this boy who'd become his son teach courage to strangers. 6 months ago, Marcus had been ready to throw Eli aside, had seen danger where there was heroism, had almost let fear override everything that mattered. Now he understood. Sometimes angels wear secondhand shoes. Sometimes heroes are the ones society overlooks and ignores and decides aren't worth seeing. Sometimes the people we're quickest to judge are the ones most ready to save us. And sometimes family isn't born. It isn't about blood or biology or legal documents, though those help. Sometimes family is chosen, earned, built from courage and gratitude, and 23 motorcycles rolling down a quiet street to say, "You're one of ours now." Built from a father learning that brotherhood means showing up. From a community deciding that invisible children deserve to be seen. From a boy who'd lost everything finding out that sometimes when you save someone else, you save yourself. 2. The local news picked it up first. A human interest story about a homeless boy who saved a biker's daughter. About a motorcycle club that responded with compassion instead of the violence people expected. Channel 7 ran it during the evening broadcast. And by morning it had been shared 3,000 times on social media. Then the regional outlets picked it up, then the national ones. Within a week, Eli's story was everywhere. Newspapers, morning shows, online publications that usually focused on conflict and division. Suddenly desperate to share something that restored faith in humanity. The Hells Angels, usually portrayed as villains in leather, as the dangerous element that law-abiding citizens should fear, were being called heroes. Not just Marcus and his chapter, but the broader organization found themselves in an unfamiliar position, being celebrated for what they'd always known they were: brotherhood, family, people who showed up when it mattered. Other motorcycle clubs started paying attention. The Iron Riders in Detroit launched a mentorship program, pairing club members with at-risk youth. The Desert Rats in Arizona partnered with homeless shelters to provide job training. The Coastal Brothers in Oregon started a scholarship fund for kids aging out of foster care that IT spread like wildfire. This idea that tough men on motorcycles could be protectors instead of threats, that strength could be used for building up instead of tearing down. The Fifth Street shelter received donations that changed everything. Enough money to hire a full-time CPR instructor. Enough to provide certification courses for free to anyone who walked through their doors. Ms. Chun cried when she saw the checks. Overwhelmed by strangers deciding that teaching homeless people to save lives was worth their money, Eli and Marcus became speakers. Schools invited them to talk about courage, about family, about showing up when the world tells you to look away. They stood together in gymnasiums and auditoriums, this father and son who'd found each other through crisis, and told their story to thousands of students who'd never thought twice about the invisible. People they passed every day. Heroes don't always look like what you expect, Eli would say, his voice steady now, confident in a way that 6 months of belonging had built. Sometimes they look like a girl who needs help. Sometimes they look like bikers on motorcycles. Sometimes they look like the person you're ignoring on the street corner. The city council took notice. Councilwoman Rodriguez, who'd been pushing for homeless services reform for years, saw an opportunity. She drafted legislation requiring CPR and basic first aid training in all public assistance programs, shelters, food banks, community centers. If Eli had learned CPR because a shelter offered training, how many other lives could be saved by making that standard instead of optional? They called it Eli's Law. It passed unanimously. The boy who'd been invisible 6 months ago now had legislation named after him. A permanent reminder that preparation and compassion could change everything. One afternoon, one fall, one boy who refused to run away when running was all he knew. That's how you change a city. That's how you prove that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up when someone needs saving. Eli saved Emma with CPR. The Hells Angels saved Eli with community. But who saves the thousands of other invisible children still living in alleys, still eating from dumpsters, still wondering if anyone would notice if they disappeared? That answer starts with people like you. If this story moved you, do 3 things. First, subscribe, because stories like this remind us that goodness exists, that unexpected heroes walk among us, that hope isn't naive, it's necessary. Hitting subscribe means you're choosing to see people others ignore, choosing to believe that ordinary moments can contain extraordinary courage. Click it if you're standing against indifference. Second, comment, no more invisible kids. Every comment is a vote for compassion over judgment, for action over apathy. Let's flood this section with people who believe every child deserves a chance, who understand that society is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable. Make your voice count. Third, share this video. Someone in your life needs to remember that one person can change everything, that courage doesn't require resources, just heart, that angels wear secondhand shoes. Your share might reach someone who's given up hope, or someone who has the power to help but hasn't been moved to action yet. The trolls will say this is too good to be true. The cynics will claim it's staged. But Marcus, Emma, and Eli don't care what critics think. They're too busy building family from fragments, proving that brotherhood beats blood every single time. Oh, what's it going to be? Will you scroll past? Or will you stand with the people who stop, who see, who save? Hit subscribe. Join the community. Be the person who shows up. Because the next time someone needs saving, it might be you holding the power to be their miracle. Welcome to the family.